So, gentlemen, I've introduced you, and so I'm going to turn it over to Bill DuBay and Andrew Carpenter, who will go through some slides to really get us started in terms of the topic. And what will follow will be a fireside chat and Q&A.
So thank you, Peter. So hi, good afternoon or morning or evening, depending on your time zone. I'm Andy Carpenter. I'm actually going to lead off this this presentation, and then Bill is going to take over, and then it's going to come back to me. So it's a bit of a handout. So first of all, we both like to thank the Societe for this opportunity. I'm very humbled. We think this is an important topic, and really glad that this is being addressed. So thank you to to Peter and the Societe for this opportunity. I'd also like to stop and just say generally thank you. It's great to see leadership within the chemical industry from organizations like this, right? To be able to promote conversations, dialogue about important topics, as well as their work in scholarship and just honoring the folks in the chemical industry. So, Peter, thanks to you and the other members of the Societe. So today, before I start, I actually want to announce that today is National Essential Medicine Shortage Awareness Day. It's the inaugural year for that. I didn't know exactly how these things take place, but it's really kind of a coincidence that it happens on the day that I'm presenting as a representative from Phlow on essential medicines, drug shortage, the whole API supply chain issues that we hope to jump into shortly. And Bill and I have put together a presentation that clearly does not get into the details really as a deep dive. It's really more a collection of highlights really to be used as a discussion starter. So we're really looking forward to the fireside chat part as well as the Q&A. So hopefully folks will stick around for that. So Peter, if we could go to the first slide, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to see that or not. Yeah, we can actually jump to the first slide. Or the next slide, I guess I should say.
Technical difficulties right out of the box, Andy.
Okay, so there we go. So this slide is really a very, very complicated slide that I'm not going to get into the details, but this really addresses the issue, at least for us at Phlow, and as Bill DuBay will tell you, Ampec Fine Chemicals, one of our strategic partners, is that the current supply chain for small molecule essential medicines is really it's complex, it's inefficient, it's fragmented, and quite frankly, in our minds, it's broken. And it's broken because there have been essential medicines on drug shortage for decades. And it just shouldn't happen. It's because these are not expensive medicines. These are, at least by many, have viewed these as commodities, and we can't view these medicines as commodities anymore, right? And there's a number of reasons, right? That the supply chain is broken. One is that it's complex, and that's really talking about how you get the materials that are manufactured into the drug all the way to the patient, right? So there's all sorts of organizations that touch these medicines along the way, and we think there is a better solution to that, which I'll get to a little bit later. But what I want to focus on is the right side of the slide, because that's really where I think I'm hoping the audience is, and that's in API manufacturer, even drug product manufacturer, right? Or just manufacturing in general of chemicals. And that is that at least for API manufacturing, most of the supply chain has left the U.S. and we would like to bring that back. When I think about a supply chain, I think of two things. I think of comfort and control, right? You want to be able to control as much as you can of that supply chain. Does that mean that you have to actually do everything yourself? That the answer is no, right? That's not cost effective, but you at least want to have some level of control. And if you don't have that high level control that you manufacture yourself, you want to have the comfort and the trust of partners that are reliable, right? And that you have visibility to. And so our perspective is that the supply chain in general is fragmented. In many ways, it's siloed, inefficient, and therefore there have been a lot of shortages. Now, you might ask yourself, what is driving a shortage? Well, it might just be supply and demand. So stop and think about, trying to get toilet paper back when COVID first hit. I mean, that was clearly a supply and demand problem, right? But for API manufacturing, I think it's certainly more complex than simply demand. It's more, the partners and organizations and the supply chain that starts all the way at the beginning. And so, Peter, if I could get the next slide. So with respect to the shortages, where are we today? There have been prolonged shortages of very important medicines. And currently there are, more than 120 drugs already in short supply. I'm betting I'm preaching to the choir when I remind folks that there is a lack of API manufacturing capacity and infrastructure in the US that's focused not on essential medicines, which are mostly generics, but also just APIs in general. We believe that the US has lost a leadership position in competitive pharmaceutical manufacturing, especially in the areas of key startup material. And as the cost of pharmaceuticals continue to rise, we have to ask ourselves, who is skimming off the top and taking profits so that the patients are really, paying much higher prices than they need to. And so I'll have a little bit to say about that later. So what Bill and I thought we would do is give a little bit about our respective organizations and how we believe we can play a role into this. So Peter, the next slide is really a background on Phlow. We believe we are the only company focused on trying to solve the essential medicines drug shortage. We would like to be the first US-based, fully integrated advanced manufacturing solutions provider for these essential medicines. What we currently have is we have really great thought leadership, but we are building other capabilities. So for example, we are building an R&D lab for ourselves, but we are strategically partnering with other organizations, Medicines for All, which actually happens to be the organization founded by one of our co-founders, Frank Upton. But we also have partnered with the government, and they are providing funds for us to construct advanced manufacturing facilities, so we can make KSMs and essential medicines. We are partnering with Ampec Fine Chemicals to help in the co-development and eventual manufacturing, either in their facilities or our facilities when they are operational. And then we're partnering with the largest nonprofit pharmaceutical company, Civica, in being able to convert API into drug product and get these drug products directly to the hospitals. So we view ourselves as a company that will then be able to provide visibility across the whole value chain of starting from those key starting materials all the way to drug product, and that we innovate, that we are efficient, cost competitive, and we can start knocking off a lot of the drugs from the drug shortage list. I have mentioned Ampec Fine Chemicals as a strategic partner, so I'm going to turn it over to Bill now to take us through the next couple slides.
Thanks, Andy. Next slide, Peter. Yeah, so I'm actually an employee of SK PharmTeco. SK PharmTeco is the corporate holding company for all of our pharma business. And so we have sites all over the world, including Ireland, Korea, France. But we're going to focus on mostly the 3 sites that we have in the US. And those are the sites that are going to work specifically with Phlow on developing domestic supply chain for these essential medicines. Next slide. So, I mean, what is the real problem? When you look at the supply chain for where all of our generic drugs come from, the formulated product, only about 60% are manufactured in the US, with 40% being outside the US. And if you back up even a little bit further, where do those APIs come from? About 80% of those APIs are coming from outside the United States, with only 20% being domestic. And then go back one more step, where do those key starting materials come from to make those APIs? And that's where almost 95% of all key starting materials are made outside the United States. And so when you look at some of the issues that we're having, if you have a pandemic or some other event within the global community, and it disrupts the supply chain, that's one of the things that causes the shortages for these drugs. I have 2 books there at the bottom, one by Catherine Ebon and another one by Rosemary Gibson. Both talk about the pharmaceutical industry in both China and India, and actually quite interesting and play really well into this, but I won't go into those at this point. Next slide, Peter. So supply chain disruptions. What are some of the causes for these supply chain disruptions? Well, I mean, one of the most recent ones, and what's really brought a lot of awareness to our U.S. government, is this pandemic. This pandemic has caused shortages of various drugs, mostly the essential medicines, from countries like India and China. And you know, when you think about it, a lot of these countries want to treat their own people first, and it makes sense. So why don't we have that same supply chain in the United States, and why can't we deal with that? We have a personal experience with this when the U.S. government came to us and said, "Can you guys make hydroxychloroquine?" That's at the beginning, before everybody knew that it didn't work. But there's like, we may need it if this stuff really does work. And so we started looking for API just to get it into the warehouse, and the Indian government put a lock on it and could not export it outside of the country. And then so we said, okay, that's fine. Can you give us the raw materials and we'll just make it, and then we'll supply the U.S. government. And they also put a lock on those raw materials. So interesting example based on what I just talked about in the previous slide. But there are various issues that need to be addressed, from regional lockdowns, reduced workers. I mean, that's a problem that all industries within this area are having issues with. The ports being shut down. The Suez Canal blockage caused a lot of backup in import of various raw materials across the globe. You know, I think last month we reached a record in California where there were more ships staged outside the port outside of LA than there has been in a long time. So it's quite a real thing. Another event, which is quite real as well, is the Chinese government. So they can and they do shut down companies whenever they feel like it. So they sometimes, so another personal experience is a company was told to switch out their coal-fired boilers to something that's more less pollution, and the company didn't do it, and so I believe the Chinese government gave them a year to get this done, and after a year they just went in and just closed the door. So all of the raw materials or APIs that this company was making was just shut down just overnight. One other event that I can talk about is the Texas freeze. That's still affecting the global supply chains, especially here in the U.S. And then, there are other things like trucking and all kinds of shipping and receiving problems that are going on within our industry. Next slide. I think this one's back to you, Andy.
Sure. So what are some of the reasons why things have gone offshore, and if we want to bring these back, what do we need to do that? And very quickly, if you look at the cost drivers for the COGS by category across the three regions, India, China, and the EU and US, you really see that if you keep the raw materials coming from the same source, right, those will all stay the same price, but the cost for the labor and the facilities change dramatically as you go from India to China, all the way to the US and the EU. And really, that means that things manufactured in the US or the EU are just having a hard time being competitive, right? And since most things are a race to the bottom, right? Who has the best bottom line? Everyone's looking in, for example, including the U.S. government, right? They buy the cheapest product that's out there, right? They don't care where it's made. So, U.S. manufacturers have to find ways to be competitive, right? We believe that using advanced manufacturing, like continuous manufacturing or automation, can really help to mitigate those higher labor costs and facility costs. So that's just an example. So what else can be done? We really believe that, much like in the, I guess it was in the 80s with the Hatch-Waxman Act, where that essentially revolutionized the generics industry because they gave exclusivity for 6 months. That really brought generics into the to the drug product, or to the drug space, because they could now make a good return on investment. That brought the cost of generics down to the patient. So overall, that was a great way to incentivize a certain industry. We believe that the government needs to do that, and I have just 2 slides that support this. So Peter, if you could advance to the next one. Certainly the last administration was big on Buy America, right? Or through the Buy American Act. And that was really, trying to push manufacturers or consumers, right, to be required to buy materials that were had a certain percentage of that product manufactured in the U.S. The current administration is no different. They've really picked up the baton, and in the Biden 100-day review and report, which is entitled "Building Resilient Supply Chains, Revitalize American Manufacturing, Foster Broad-Based Growth," they specifically call out API manufacturing and KSM supply as something that is important, and that's really to drive higher quality drug manufacturing here in the U.S. Something that's actually dear to Phlow and AMPAC is the American Rescue Act, where there's $3 billion that's set aside for investment into economic development in industries and communities that have been hit hard by the pandemic. We are working together with a Central Virginia group on the Build Back Better program, where we're trying to get funding for infrastructure so we can create a pharma cluster here outside the Petersburg campus that AMPAC holds. And then if you go to the next slide, now these are just things that are potentially coming out. So these are bills that, of course, we'd like to see turned into law. The Industrial Finance Corporation Act, the Pharmaceutical Supply Chain Defense and Enhancement Act, the Made in America Act, and Continuous Manufacturing Research Act. I'm not going to go through these, but these are all areas where the government is trying to incentivize and play a role to help invest so that we can bring manufacturing back to the United States. I'm going to close with the last slide, which really kind of ties up how Phlow is trying to be, a solution provider. We use Medicines for All and AMPAC as our development arm to find new ways to make these essential medicines, so that we can start with cheaper building blocks that we can obtain here in the United States, and that then we will come up with a new process for that, hoping to use continuous manufacturing for these essential medicines. We will manufacture these either at AMPAC or in our own facilities on the AMPAC campus. And once we complete the API validation and commercial batches, we will partner with Civica or other organizations to get these directly to patients. So, AMPAC and Phlow are trying to work, our part to make a change and knock off some of these drug shortages. So I think that's all that Bill and I prepared. So I think, Peter, you're probably going to want us to go to the fireside chat.